Set in rural Arizona in 1952, this story follows Sarah Mitchell, a young teacher who moves to the small town of Copper Creek to start fresh after a personal tragedy. When she challenges the town's discriminatory practices against Native Americans, she faces violent retaliation from local extremists who tie her to the church fence as a warning. Her rescue comes from Thomas Yazzie, a quiet Apache ranch hand who works nearby. As Sarah recovers from her ordeal, she and Thomas form an unlikely friendship that gradually blossoms into something deeper. Together, they must navigate the dangerous prejudices of their time while fighting for justice and equality in their community. Their relationship faces numerous obstacles, from death threats to social ostracism, but their bond grows stronger as they work to bridge the divide between their two worlds, ultimately inspiring change in their small Arizona town. The Greyhound bus wheezed to a stop outside Murphy's General Store, its brakes hissing like a tired animal in the oppressive August heat. Sarah Mitchell pressed her face against the dusty window, watching the small town of Copper Creek, Arizona, stretch before her like a faded photograph. The main street was little more than a collection of sun-bleached buildings, their wooden facades weathered by decades of desert wind and relentless sunshine. Sarah gathered her worn leather satchel and the single cardboard suitcase that contained her entire life. At 26, she was starting over in a place where nobody knew her story, where the whispers about what happened in Chicago couldn't follow. The bus driver, a weathered man with kind eyes, helped her down the steep steps. "You sure this is your stop, miss?" he asked, glancing around at the seemingly empty street. "Ain't much happening here." "I'm certain," Sarah replied, managing a smile. "Thank you for your kindness." The bus pulled away, leaving her standing alone in a cloud of dust and diesel exhaust. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the distant sound of a windmill creaking in the breeze. Sarah had grown accustomed to the constant noise of the city, the elevated trains, the traffic, the voices of hundreds of people. This quiet felt almost sacred. She walked toward the general store, her heels clicking against the wooden sidewalk. The August sun beat down mercilessly, and she could already feel sweat forming beneath her navy blue dress. Through the store's window, she could see movement inside. A woman arranging canned goods on shelves, a few men gathered around what appeared to be a checkers game. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and all conversation stopped. 5 pairs of eyes turned to study her, taking in her city clothes, her carefully styled hair, the way she carried herself with quiet confidence. She was clearly not from here. "Good afternoon," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the scrutiny. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, the new teacher. I was told I could find directions to the school here." The woman behind the counter, plump and middle-aged with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun, stepped forward with a welcoming smile. "Oh, honey, we've been expecting you." "I'm Dorothy Murphy. This is my store. Welcome to Copper Creek." Dorothy's warmth was immediately apparent, and Sarah felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "Thank you, Mrs. Murphy. It's wonderful to finally be here. Please, call me Dorothy. We don't stand on ceremony much in these parts." Dorothy came around the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. "The school's just 2 blocks down Main Street, can't miss it. But first, let me introduce you to some of the locals." The men at the checkers table had resumed their game, but Sarah could feel their occasional glances. Dorothy led her over to them. "Boys, this is Sarah Mitchell, our new teacher. Sarah, meet Frank Weber. He runs the hardware store. And Jim Patterson, he's our postal clerk." Frank Weber was a large man with calloused hands and a suspicious expression. He nodded briefly, but didn't offer to shake her hand. "From back east, I'm guessing?" "Chicago," Sarah replied. Frank's tone suggested this wasn't necessarily a good thing. "We do things different out here, Miss Mitchell. Simple folks with simple ways." "I'm sure I'll adapt quickly," Sarah said, maintaining her polite smile. "I'm looking forward to meeting the children and getting to know the community." Jim Patterson, a thin man with nervous eyes, spoke up. "School's been closed for 3 months now. Mrs. Henderson, the previous teacher, she left rather suddenly. Health problems, they said." Something in his tone suggested there was more to the story, but Dorothy quickly changed the subject. "Well, that's all behind us now. Sarah, have you found a place to stay yet? I was hoping to ask about that. I was told there might be a room available above the diner." "That's right, May's diner. She's got a nice little apartment upstairs, clean, quiet, and May's cooking is the best in town." Dorothy glanced at the men who had returned to their game. "Why don't I walk you over there? You must be exhausted from the journey." They stepped back into the blazing afternoon sun, and Dorothy immediately began pointing out the important buildings. "That's the bank, the diner's right there with the red awning, and the church is at the end of the street." pretty little Methodist church built in 1889. Pastor Williams is a good man, you'll like him. As they walked, Sarah noticed the town had a tired quality, as if it had seen better days. Many of the buildings needed fresh paint, and several storefronts were empty. But there was something honest about the place, something that appealed to her after the complexity and heartbreak of her life in Chicago. "Dorothy, can I ask you something?" Sarah said as they approached the diner. "The previous teacher, Mrs. Henderson, what really happened to her?" Dorothy's step faltered slightly. "Well, she had some difficulties. Some people in town didn't appreciate certain things she tried to do." "What kind of things?" "She thought some of the local children weren't being treated fairly. The Indian children, I mean. There's a reservation about 20 miles east of here, and some of those families send their kids to our school." Dorothy's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Mrs. Henderson thought they deserved the same opportunities as everyone else." Sarah felt a chill despite the heat, and people objected to that. "Some people," Dorothy said carefully. "Not everyone, mind you, but enough to make her life difficult." Before Sarah could ask more questions, they had reached May's diner. The smell of coffee and fried food wafted out as Dorothy opened the door. The interior was clean and cheerful, with red vinyl booths and a long counter with swivel stools. A robust woman with silver hair was wiping down tables. "May, I'd like you to meet Sarah Mitchell, our new teacher." May looked up with a warm smile that reminded Sarah of her own mother. "Well, aren't you a sight for sore eyes? I was beginning to think they'd never send us a replacement." She set down her cloth and came over to shake Sarah's hand. "May Thompson, and I'm delighted to meet you." "The pleasure's mine, Mrs. Thompson. I understand you might have a room available." "Call me May, honey. And yes, I do. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean and comfortable. 2 windows that catch the morning breeze, which is a blessing in this heat. Why don't I show you up?" The apartment was small but charming, with a bed, a dresser, a small table and chair, and a corner area with a hot plate and basin for washing. The 2 windows May had mentioned looked out over the main street, and Sarah could imagine sitting here in the evenings watching the town settle into quiet. "This is perfect," Sarah said. "What would you charge for rent?" $15 a month, includes breakfast downstairs." "Fair enough." "More than fair." Sarah reached into her purse and counted out the money. "I'll take it." "Wonderful. Now you must be hungry. How about I fix you a sandwich and some coffee?" "On the house, welcome to Copper Creek." As they sat in a booth downstairs, May proved to be a fountain of information about the town. She told Sarah about the copper mine that had given the town its name, closed now for 5 years, about the ranching families who still made a living from the harsh land, about the summer heat that could kill a man, and the winter cold that could do the same. "The school's a good little building," May said, refilling Sarah's coffee cup. 23 students last year, ages 6 to 16. They're good kids mostly. You'll find them a bit shy at first. We don't get many outsiders here. I'm looking forward to meeting them. When does school start? First Monday in September, so you've got about 3 weeks to settle in and prepare. May's expression grew serious. "Sarah, I hope you don't mind me asking, but why did you come here? I mean, a young woman like you, educated, pretty, seems like you could have found a position anywhere." Sarah had expected this question and had prepared an answer that was true without being complete. "I needed a fresh start. Sometimes life doesn't go the way you plan, and you have to find the courage to begin again." May nodded understandingly. "We all have chapters we'd rather not revisit." "Well, you're welcome here, honey. This town could use some new energy." After finishing her meal, Sarah walked to the school building. It was a modest structure, white clapboard with a bell tower and a small playground. The door was unlocked, and she pushed inside to find a single large room with rows of wooden desks, a blackboard at the front, and tall windows that let in the late afternoon light. The previous teacher had left everything remarkably organized. Textbooks were stacked neatly on shelves, and there was a lesson plan book on the desk with notes about each student. Sarah sat in the teacher's chair and opened the book, reading about Johnny Martinez, age 8, bright but struggles with English, and Susan Weber, age 10, excellent student but can be disruptive. As she read, she noticed that several students had notations like IR next to their names. It took her a moment to realize this likely meant Indian reservation. These students had additional notes, often absent, language barrier, family situations difficult. Sarah felt a familiar stirring in her chest, the same feeling she'd had in Chicago when she'd seen injustice and felt compelled to act. She'd come here to start over, to live quietly and avoid the kind of trouble that had driven her from her previous life. But already she could see that wouldn't be possible. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the desert sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Sarah locked the school and walked back toward the diner, her mind already working on lesson plans and ways to help all her students succeed. She didn't notice the man watching her from across the street or the way he turned to speak to his companion when she disappeared into the diner. She didn't see them shake their heads and walk away, their conversation too low to hear, but their expressions clear enough. Change was coming to Copper Creek, whether the town was ready or not. The school bell's resonant clang echoed across Copper Creek at exactly 8 o'clock on the first Monday morning of September. Sarah had been awake since 5, her stomach churning with a mixture of excitement and anxiety that she hadn't felt since her first day teaching in Chicago 3 years ago. She'd spent the weekend preparing her classroom, arranging desks to encourage interaction, and creating welcoming displays on the bulletin boards. Now, standing at the school's front door in her best green dress, Sarah watched as children began arriving from various directions. Some came on foot from the town's residential streets, their shoes raising small clouds of dust. Others arrived in the backs of pickup trucks or on horseback, dismounting with practiced ease and tying their horses to the hitching post behind the building. The first student to reach her was a blonde girl with pigtails, about 10 years old, who approached with confident steps and a bright smile. "Good morning, Miss Mitchell. I'm Susan Weber. My daddy owns the hardware store." The girl's voice carried a hint of pride and expectation, as if her father's position in town granted her special status. "Good morning, Susan. I'm so pleased to meet you." Sarah shook the girl's hand formally, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact. "Are you excited about starting the new school year?" "Yes, Mum, I heard you're from Chicago. Is it true there are buildings so tall they touch the clouds?" Sarah laughed, charmed by the girl's curiosity. "Some of them are quite tall, but they don't quite reach the clouds. Perhaps we can talk about big cities during our geography lessons." More students began gathering around the entrance, and Sarah made an effort to greet each one personally. There was Johnny Martinez, a small boy with dark hair and serious eyes, who answered her questions with polite, single-word responses. Tommy Patterson, the postal clerk's son, was a gangly 12-year-old who seemed more interested in the grasshoppers in the schoolyard than in conversation. As the minutes ticked by, Sarah noticed a group of children approaching from the east, the direction of the reservation. They walked together, moving more slowly than the other students, and she could see the hesitation in their posture. There were 5 of them, ranging in age from what looked like 6 to perhaps 14. The oldest, a girl with long black braids and intelligent dark eyes, seemed to be shepherding the younger ones. She wore a simple blue dress that had been carefully mended in several places, and her shoes, though clean, were obviously well worn. Despite her youth, she carried herself with a dignity that reminded Sarah of her own mother. The town children had noticed the approaching group, and Sarah observed the subtle but unmistakable shift in the atmosphere. Conversations became quieter, and several students moved closer to the building, creating an invisible but clear division in the schoolyard. Sarah walked directly toward the group from the reservation, her smile warm and welcoming. "Good morning. I'm Miss Mitchell, your new teacher. I'm so glad you're here." The older girl looked up, surprise flickering across her face. "Good morning, Miss Mitchell. I'm Maria Yazzie. These are my brothers and cousins." She gestured to the children behind her. "Joseph, Anna, David, and little Samuel. It's wonderful to meet all of you." Sarah crouched down to be at eye level with Samuel, who couldn't have been more than 6. "And how old are you, Samuel?" The boy hid behind Maria's skirt, but she gently encouraged him. "Tell Miss Mitchell your age, Samuel. She's nice." "6, came the whispered response. "6 is perfect for first grade. I have some books I think you'll really enjoy." Sarah stood and addressed the group. "I'm looking forward to learning about all of you this year. Education is the most important gift we can give ourselves, don't you think?" Maria nodded solemnly. "Yes, ma'am. My grandmother says learning is the path to understanding the world." "Your grandmother sounds very wise." The school bell rang again, signaling the official start of the day. Sarah gathered all 23 students together for the first time, noting how they naturally separated into distinct groups, the town children clustering together, the reservation children staying close to Maria, and a few ranch children who seemed to belong to neither group but weren't actively excluding anyone. "Welcome, everyone, to what I hope will be a wonderful year of learning and discovery," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly across the schoolyard. "I know some of you are wondering about your new teacher, so let me tell you a little about myself. I come from Chicago, where I taught for 3 years. I love reading, learning about different places and people, and I believe every single one of you has something special to offer." She paused, making eye contact with students from each group. In our classroom, we will treat each other with respect and kindness. We will help each other learn and grow. And most importantly, we will remember that our differences make us stronger, not weaker. Susan Weber raised her hand. Miss Mitchell, what grade did you teach in Chicago? I taught a mixed-age classroom, much like this one. I find that older students can help younger ones, and everyone learns better when we work together. As they filed into the building, Sarah noticed Frank Weber standing across the street, his arms crossed and his expression disapproving. He wasn't alone. 2 other men flanked him, and all 3 were watching the school with intense interest. Sarah recognized one of them as Carl Brennan, whom she'd met briefly at the general store. The 3rd man was unknown to her, but his posture suggested he was not pleased with what he was seeing. Inside the classroom, Sarah had arranged the desks in a horseshoe shape rather than traditional rows. This caused some confusion among the students, who were clearly accustomed to a more rigid seating arrangement. "Why are the desks like this?" asked Tommy Patterson. "Because I want us to be able to see each other when we talk and learn together. In the old arrangement, you could only see the back of the person in front of you. This way, we're all part of the same conversation." She assigned seats deliberately, mixing ages and backgrounds. Maria found herself sitting next to Rebecca Johnson, a rancher's daughter, who seemed less affected by the social divisions than the town children. Samuel was placed near Susan Weber, and Johnny Martinez was seated beside Tommy Patterson. The morning began with introductions, and Sarah learned fascinating details about each student. Rebecca could ride horses and rope cattle. Tommy knew the name of every person in town and could recite the train schedule from memory. Maria spoke 3 languages, English, Spanish, and what she called our traditional language, and helped her family by translating for older relatives. "Maria, would you be willing to teach us a few words in your traditional language?" Sarah asked. "I think it would be wonderful for all of us to learn something new." The girl's eyes lit up, but she glanced nervously at the other students. I don't know if that's allowed." "Of course it's allowed. Learning about different cultures and languages makes us all smarter and more understanding." Maria taught them the words for hello, thank you, and friend. The younger children were particularly enthusiastic, repeating the unfamiliar sounds with giggles and determination. Even some of the older town children seemed interested, though they were more cautious about showing it. The morning flew by with reading assessments, basic math problems, and discussions about what they hoped to learn during the year. Sarah was impressed by the intelligence and curiosity of all her students, though she noticed that the reservation children were more hesitant to speak up, often deferring to their town counterparts. At lunchtime, the division became more apparent. The town children sat together under the large cottonwood tree, unpacking elaborate lunches from metal boxes. The reservation children sat separately, sharing simple meals that appeared to be mostly bread and whatever vegetables or meat their families could spare. Sarah ate her own lunch, a sandwich May had packed for her, while walking among the groups, engaging in conversation and trying to bridge the invisible barriers. She noticed that little Samuel had finished his meager lunch quickly and was watching the other children eat with obvious hunger. "Samuel, are you still hungry?" she asked quietly. The boy nodded, but immediately looked ashamed. "It's okay, Miss Mitchell. Mama says I should be grateful for what I have." "Your mama is right about being grateful, but there's nothing wrong with being hungry. Wait right here." Sarah returned to the classroom and retrieved an apple from her desk drawer, part of her own lunch that she'd been saving for later. She also found some crackers May had sent along. When she returned to Samuel, she knelt down beside him. "I brought too much food today and I wondered if you might help me finish it. I hate to waste food." Samuel's face brightened and he accepted the apple with both hands. "Thank you, Miss Mitchell. This is the best apple I've ever seen." The afternoon brought more challenges. During a history lesson about Arizona's statehood, Sarah made the mistake of asking if anyone knew about the people who lived in the area before European settlers arrived. Maria raised her hand tentatively. "My great-grandmother used to tell stories about the old days before the reservation." "That's wonderful, Maria. History is so much more interesting when we can learn from people who actually lived through it, or whose families remember it." Susan Weber's hand shot up. "My daddy says we shouldn't talk about that stuff. He says it just causes trouble." "Your daddy is concerned about you, Susan, and that's natural. But learning about history, all of history, helps us understand how we got to where we are today. It doesn't cause trouble. It helps us avoid making the same mistakes." The comment sparked an uncomfortable silence. Several students shifted in their seats, and Sarah realized she had ventured into dangerous territory. She quickly moved on to a mathematics lesson, but the tension remained. After school, as the students were leaving, Maria approached Sarah's desk. "Miss Mitchell, may I ask you something?" "Of course, Maria. What's on your mind? Are you really going to let us learn the same things as the town children?" Mrs. Henderson said she would, but then the girl's voice trailed off. "Then what happened to Mrs. Henderson?" Maria looked toward the door to make sure they were alone. "Some of the men in town didn't like it. They said we should learn different things, simpler things. They said we didn't need to know about literature and science and history." Sarah felt a familiar anger building in her chest, the same feeling she'd had in Chicago when she'd encountered injustice and discrimination. "Maria, you are just as intelligent and capable as any student in this classroom. You have the same right to learn and grow and dream as anyone else. I will not teach you differently because of who you are or where you come from. But what if the men complain again? Then I'll deal with them. Education is not negotiable, Maria. Your mind is a gift and no one has the right to tell you to waste it." As Maria walked away, visibly relieved and encouraged, Sarah began organizing her materials for the next day. Through the window, she could see the same group of men from the morning still standing across the street, their conversation animated and their expressions stern. She had been in Copper Creek for less than a month, but already she could feel the familiar stirring of conflict. The same instinct that had driven her to fight for her students in Chicago was awakening again, despite her intention to live quietly and avoid trouble. But as she looked at the empty desks where 23 young minds had spent the day learning and growing, she knew she couldn't retreat. These children deserved better than the limitations others wanted to place on them. The battle for their future was just beginning. 3 weeks into the school year, Sarah had established a routine that felt both familiar and revolutionary. Each morning, she arrived at the school by 7:30, spending the quiet hour before students arrived, preparing lessons and reviewing their progress. The children had adapted well to her teaching methods, and she was pleased to see friendships beginning to form across the previously rigid social lines. Maria Yazzie had proven to be one of her most capable students, helping younger children with their reading and showing a particular aptitude for mathematics that surprised even Sarah. The girl's natural leadership abilities were becoming more apparent each day, and Sarah had begun giving her additional responsibilities that showcased her talents to the other students. It was a Thursday morning in late September when Sarah first noticed the letter tucked under her classroom door. The envelope was plain white, with no return address, and her name was written in block letters across the front. She opened it while sipping her morning coffee, expecting perhaps a note from a parent about a sick child or a forgotten assignment. Instead, she found a single sheet of paper with a message that made her blood run cold. "Miss Mitchell, you are teaching things that don't belong in our school. The Indian children should know their place. If you continue mixing them with our children and filling their heads with ideas above their station, there will be consequences. This is your only warning. Concerned citizens." Sarah's hands trembled as she read the message a second time. The careful block lettering suggested someone had taken time to disguise their handwriting, and the formal tone indicated this wasn't the work of a single angry parent. The phrase "concerned citizens" implied organization, planning. She folded the letter and placed it in her desk drawer, her mind racing. This was exactly what had happened in Chicago. The same pattern of escalating pressure when she'd tried to integrate her classroom and provide equal opportunities for all students. The difference was that in Chicago, she'd had the support of the school administration and fellow teachers. Here she was alone. The school bell rang and Sarah composed herself as her students began arriving. She was determined not to let the letter affect her teaching or her interactions with the children. If anything, it strengthened her resolve to continue treating all her students with equal respect and expectation. During the morning reading lesson, she noticed that Tommy Patterson seemed distracted, glancing frequently toward the windows and fidgeting with his pencil. When she asked him to read aloud, he stumbled over words he'd mastered weeks ago. "Tommy, is everything all right?" she asked after class, keeping her voice gentle but concerned. The boy looked around nervously before answering. "Miss Mitchell, my pa says I shouldn't tell you this, but some men came to our house last night. They were asking about what you're teaching in school." Sarah's stomach tightened. "What did they want to know?" "They asked if you were treating the Indian kids the same as us. They asked if you were teaching them things that might make them think they're as good as white kids." Tommy's voice dropped to a whisper. "Pa told them he didn't know, but they said they were going to find out." "What did your father think about their visit?" "He said it wasn't right, them coming to our house like that. He said education should be for everyone, but..." Tommy hesitated. "But what?" But he also said I should be careful what I say at school. He said some people in town are getting real upset about changes. Sarah knelt down to Tommy's level, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Tommy, you haven't done anything wrong. Learning alongside your classmates, all of your classmates, is exactly what you should be doing. Don't let anyone make you feel ashamed of that. The boy nodded, but she could see the confusion and fear in his eyes. At 12, he was old enough to understand that the adult world was more complicated and dangerous than he'd previously realized. During lunch, Sarah observed her students more carefully than usual. The natural friendships that had been forming seemed more tentative today, as if some invisible pressure was being applied from outside the school walls. She noticed that Rebecca Johnson, the rancher's daughter who had been sitting with Maria during meals, was now eating with the town children again. When their eyes met, Rebecca looked away quickly. After lunch, as the students were returning to the classroom, Sarah saw a familiar figure approaching the school. Frank Weber was walking across the schoolyard with determined steps, his expression grim. Behind him, at a distance that suggested they wanted to be seen but not directly involved, stood Carl Brennan and two other men Sarah didn't recognize. "Miss Mitchell," Frank called out as he reached the school steps. "I need to speak with you." "Of course, Mr. Weber. Would you like to come inside or would you prefer to talk out here?" "Here's fine. Don't need to waste too much time on this." Frank removed his hat and ran his hand through his thinning hair. "I'm here representing several concerned parents. We've been hearing things about your teaching methods that trouble us." Sarah kept her voice calm and professional. "What specific concerns do you have? You're treating the Indian children the same as our children, giving them the same lessons, the same opportunities. That's not how things work around here. I treat all my students equally because they all deserve the same quality education." Frank's face reddened. "That's exactly the problem. Those kids don't need to learn about literature and advanced mathematics. They need to learn practical skills, things that will help them in their place in life." "And what place would that be, Mr. Weber?" "You know what place. Working on ranches, cleaning houses, basic labor. Filling their heads with fancy ideas just makes them dissatisfied with their lot in life." Sarah felt the familiar anger building in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. Every child deserves the opportunity to reach their full potential. Maria Yazzie is one of the most gifted students I've ever taught. To limit her education because of her background would be a crime. Maria Yazzie is an Indian girl who needs to learn her place in society. You're doing her no favors by treating her like she's the same as my Susan. She is the same as your Susan. She's a bright, curious child who loves learning and has dreams for her future. Frank stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Miss Mitchell, I don't think you understand how things work in this town. We've been patient with you because you're new, but our patience is wearing thin. You need to start teaching these children appropriately for their stations in life." "I will teach them appropriately for their abilities and potential, Mr. Weber. Nothing less." "Then you're making a mistake that you'll regret." Frank replaced his hat and turned to walk away, but paused after a few steps. Mrs. Henderson thought she could change things too. Look how that worked out for her. As Frank rejoined the group of men and they walked away, Sarah felt a chill despite the warm afternoon sun. The threat was unmistakable, and the reference to Mrs. Henderson's fate was clearly meant to intimidate her. That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment above May's diner, trying to grade papers, but finding herself unable to concentrate. The letter from the morning and Frank Weber's visit had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. She'd faced similar pressure in Chicago, but something about the isolation of Copper Creek made the threats feel more immediate and dangerous. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. When she opened it, she found May standing in the hallway with a tray containing a steaming bowl of soup and fresh bread. "Thought you might be hungry," May said, but her concerned expression suggested she had other reasons for the visit. "That's very kind of you, May. Please come in." May set the tray on the small table and took the chair across from Sarah. "Honey, I heard Frank Weber paid you a visit at the school today. News travels fast in a small town, faster than you might think. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. Are you planning to keep teaching all the children the same way?" Sarah studied May's face, trying to read her expression. "Would you prefer that I didn't?" "What I prefer doesn't matter. What matters is your safety." May leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Frank Weber and his friends aren't just blowing hot air. They have influence in this town and they're not above using it. What happened to Mrs. Henderson?" May was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. "She was a good woman, much like you. She believed in treating all the children fairly, but she pushed too hard, too fast. Started talking about bringing in books about different cultures, wanted to invite some of the reservation elders to speak to the class about their history and traditions. That sounds wonderful. It was wonderful. The children loved it. But some of the parents, and they didn't see it that way, they saw it as a threat to their way of life. So they forced her to leave. They made her life unbearable. Anonymous letters, threats, vandalism to her property. Her car tires were slashed twice. Someone threw a rock through her window. May's voice grew quieter. The final straw was when they started threatening the Indian families directly, told them their children wouldn't be welcome in town if they continued attending her classes. Sarah felt sick. And the school board? The town officials? Most of them were either sympathetic to the troublemakers or too scared to stand up to them. Mrs. Henderson realized she was fighting a battle she couldn't win, and more importantly, that her fight was hurting the very children she was trying to help. So she left. She left, and the Indian children stopped coming to school regularly. Some stopped coming at all. May reached across the table and took Sarah's hand. "I'm telling you this because I care about you, honey. You're a good teacher and these children need you, but you have to be smart about how you fight this battle. I can't treat my students differently based on their race, May. I won't. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to be careful. Be subtle. Find ways to help all the children without making it look like you're challenging the social order." Sarah appreciated May's concern, but she knew from experience that subtle changes weren't enough. Children learned as much from what wasn't said as from what was taught directly. If she treated the reservation children differently, even subtly, all the students would notice and internalize those differences. "I understand your concern, May, but I can't teach with one hand tied behind my back. These children deserve better." May sighed deeply. "I was afraid you'd say that. You have the same look in your eyes that Mrs. Henderson had." She stood up and moved toward the door. "Just be careful, Sarah. This town can be dangerous for people who try to change things too quickly." After May left, Sarah sat alone with her soup growing cold, staring out the window at the quiet street below. In the distance, she could see the lights of the reservation, a reminder of the families who trusted her with their children's education and futures. She thought about the letter in her desk drawer, about Frank Weber's threats, about Mrs. Henderson's fate. The smart thing would be to compromise, to find a middle ground that wouldn't provoke the town's anger. But she also thought about Maria's bright eyes when she learned something new, about Samuel's hunger for knowledge, along with food, about the potential being wasted because of prejudice and fear. Sarah reached for her lesson planning book and began preparing for the next day's classes. She would teach all her students equally, openly, and with the full weight of her conviction behind her. If that brought consequences, she would face them. But as she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling that those consequences were approaching faster than she'd anticipated. October arrived with an unexpected cold snap that sent the cottonwood leaves into brilliant displays of gold and orange. Sarah had been teaching in Copper Creek for 6 weeks now, and despite the mounting pressure from certain members of the community, she had maintained her commitment to treating all students equally. The anonymous letters had continued, 3 more in the past 2 weeks, each one more specific and threatening than the last. The latest letter, which she'd found wedged under her apartment door 2 nights ago, had included details about her daily routines that suggested someone was watching her closely. They knew what time she arrived at school, where she bought her groceries, and even that she sometimes walked to the edge of town in the evenings to watch the sunset over the desert. But Sarah refused to be intimidated. If anything, the harassment had strengthened her resolve and deepened her connection with her students. Maria Yazzie had become not just a student, but an inspiration. The girl's quick mind and natural leadership abilities were undeniable, and Sarah had begun preparing her for the high school equivalency exam that could open doors to college opportunities. It was a Tuesday morning when everything changed. Sarah arrived at school to find the front door standing open and papers scattered across the classroom floor. Her heart racing, she stepped inside to survey the damage. Her desk drawers had been pulled out and emptied. Books were knocked off shelves and someone had written "Go Home" across the blackboard in white chalk. But the most disturbing discovery was what had been done to the students' work displayed on the bulletin boards. All of the assignments by the reservation children had been torn down and shredded, while the work by the town children remained untouched. The message was clear and specific. Sarah began cleaning up methodically, her anger building with each piece of destroyed student work she gathered. These had been essays about their families, drawings of their homes, math problems they'd worked hard to solve. The destruction felt personal and cruel. She was still straightening the classroom when the first students began arriving. Maria was among the early group, and her face fell when she saw the condition of the room. "Miss Mitchell, what happened?" the girl asked, her voice small and worried. "Someone came in during the night and made a mess," Sarah replied, trying to keep her tone calm. "But don't worry, we'll have everything back to normal in no time." Maria noticed immediately that her essay about her grandmother's stories was missing from the bulletin board where it had been displayed with pride. "They took down our work," she said quietly. "Yes, they did, but that doesn't make your work any less valuable or important." More students arrived and the questions multiplied. Tommy Patterson looked frightened, while Susan Weber seemed almost pleased by what had happened. The reservation children clustered together near Maria, their expressions ranging from sadness to anger to resignation. "Why did they only take down some of the work?" asked Rebecca Johnson, the rancher's daughter, who had been one of the few to maintain friendships across cultural lines. Sarah paused in her cleaning, looking at the 23 young faces watching her. This was a teaching moment, though not one she would have chosen. "Sometimes, Rebecca, people do cruel things because they're afraid. They're afraid of change, afraid of differences, afraid of people who don't look like them or live like them. But why does that make them want to hurt us?" asked Joseph Yazzie, Maria's younger brother. "Because fear makes people do things they wouldn't normally do. It makes them forget that all people deserve respect and kindness." Susan Weber raised her hand. "My daddy says some people don't deserve the same things as others. He says there's a natural order to how things should be." The classroom fell silent. Sarah felt every eye upon her, waiting to see how she would respond to this direct challenge to everything she'd been teaching. "Susan, your father loves you and wants to protect you. That's what fathers do. But sometimes adults disagree about what's right and fair." Sarah set down the papers she'd been gathering and faced the class directly. "I believe that every person in this room, every single one of you, has the same worth, the same potential, and the same right to learn and grow and dream big dreams. Even the Indian kids," Susan pressed, "especially the Indian kids, because some people have been telling them they can't dream big for so long, that they need extra encouragement to remember how capable they are." The school day proceeded with unusual tension. During lunch, Sarah noticed that the invisible segregation lines had hardened again. The reservation children sat by themselves, and even Rebecca Johnson had rejoined the town children's group. The vandalism had sent a message that extended beyond the classroom walls. In the afternoon, Sarah was teaching a science lesson about the water cycle when she noticed a commotion outside. Through the window, she could see a group of men gathering in the street, more than the usual 3 or 4 who sometimes watched the school. This group numbered at least 8, and their body language suggested agitation and purpose. Frank Weber was among them, along with Carl Brennan and several other men Sarah recognized from around town. But there were also strangers, men whose faces she'd never seen, wearing work clothes and serious expressions. "Miss Mitchell," Maria whispered from her seat, "my Uncle Thomas is out there." Sarah looked more carefully and spotted a tall man standing slightly apart from the main group. Unlike the others, he wasn't facing the school but was instead watching the men around him with what appeared to be concern rather than anger. "Does your uncle work in town?" Sarah asked quietly. "He works at the Miller Ranch, taking care of the horses. He's not like the others. He doesn't usually come to town except for supplies." The lesson continued, but Sarah found it difficult to concentrate with the growing crowd outside. She could see the men gesturing toward the school, their discussion becoming more animated. Several times, Frank Weber pointed directly at the building, his face red with anger. When the final bell rang at 3 o'clock, Sarah made a decision that would have consequences she couldn't yet imagine. "I'd like all of you to stay in your seats for a few more minutes," she announced. "There are some men outside who seem upset about something, and I want to make sure it's safe for you to leave." Through the window, she could see that the crowd had grown to more than a dozen men. Some were holding what appeared to be a petition or document, and their voices were becoming loud enough to hear through the glass, though she couldn't make out specific words. Maria's Uncle Thomas had moved closer to the school building, and Sarah noticed that he seemed to be trying to position himself between the crowd and the front door. His posture was tense but protective. "Miss Mitchell," Tommy Patterson said, his voice shaky. "My pa's out there too, but he don't look happy about it." Sarah looked again and spotted Jim Patterson standing at the edge of the group, his hands shoved deep in his pockets and his expression uncomfortable. He appeared to be there reluctantly, perhaps pressured to attend rather than participating willingly. Suddenly the crowd began moving toward the school. Frank Weber was clearly the leader, his voice rising above the others as he approached the front steps. "Miss Mitchell," he called out, "we need to talk to you. Now." Sarah turned to her students, who were all watching with wide, frightened eyes. "I want all of you to stay calm and stay in your seats. No matter what happens, remember that you have done nothing wrong." She walked to the door and stepped outside, closing it firmly behind her. The afternoon sun was bright, but she felt cold as she faced the assembled group of men. "Mr. Weber, gentlemen, what can I do for you?" Frank held up a piece of paper. "We've got a petition here signed by over 30 concerned citizens. We're demanding that you change your teaching methods immediately. What specific changes are you requesting? Stop treating the Indian kids the same as our children. Separate lessons, separate expectations, separate everything. They can share the same building, but that's where the similarity ends." Sarah looked at the faces around her, some angry, some uncomfortable, some simply curious. "I cannot and will not provide different quality education based on a child's background. Then you'll be leaving Copper Creek," Carl Brennan spoke up, just like Mrs. Henderson. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Brennan?" "We're telling you how things are going to be," Frank replied. "You've got until the end of the week to change your ways, or we'll make sure you're no longer welcome here." "And if I refuse?" The men exchanged glances, and Sarah could see that some of them were uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. Jim Patterson looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. "Then you'll face the consequences," Frank said finally. "This town has ways of dealing with troublemakers." As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah noticed that Thomas Yazzie remained behind, pretending to adjust his horse's bridle while keeping an eye on the school. When the last of the angry men had walked away, he approached her. "Miss Mitchell," he said quietly, his voice carrying a slight accent, "you should be very careful. These men are more dangerous than you know." "Are you threatening me too, Mr. Yazzie?" "No, ma'am, I'm warning you. There's a difference." He glanced toward the direction the men had gone. "My niece Maria talks about you at home, says you're the first teacher who's ever treated her like she matters. That means something to our family." "Maria is an exceptional student. She deserves every opportunity to succeed." Thomas nodded slowly. "That's what makes you dangerous to them. You see what they don't want to see." He mounted his horse with easy grace. "Be careful, Miss Mitchell. Very careful." As he rode away, Sarah remained on the school steps, watching the empty street and thinking about the ultimatum she'd been given. She had until the end of the week to capitulate or face the consequences. Inside the classroom, 23 students waited for her return, their futures hanging in the balance of decisions made by adults who claimed to know what was best for them. Sarah straightened her shoulders and walked back inside. She had 3 days to figure out how to protect her students while staying true to her principles. She had no idea that the decision would soon be taken out of her hands entirely. Friday evening arrived with an ominous stillness that seemed to press down on Copper Creek like a heavy blanket. Sarah had spent the week teaching with determined normalcy, refusing to alter her methods despite the ultimatum. The petition signers had made their deadline clear, and she had made her answer equally clear through her actions. The day's classes had proceeded with unusual tension. Several of the town children had been absent, and those who remained seemed subdued and watchful. The reservation children, led by Maria, had shown remarkable courage, participating fully in lessons despite the obvious pressure from outside the classroom walls. As the final bell rang and students began filing out, Maria lingered behind, organizing papers on her desk with unnecessary care. "Miss Mitchell," she said quietly when they were alone, "my Uncle Thomas says you should not stay in town tonight. He says the men are planning something bad." Sarah paused in her own cleanup, studying the girl's worried expression. "What kind of something bad, Maria?" "He wouldn't say exactly, but he told my grandmother to make sure all our family stays on the reservation tonight. He said the town is not safe for any of us." The weight of those words settled heavily on Sarah's shoulders. Thomas Yazzie had struck her as a man who didn't speak carelessly or spread unnecessary alarm. If he was warning his family to stay away from town, the threat was real and immediate. "Maria, I want you to go straight home and stay there. Promise me." "I promise. But what about you?" "I'll be fine. I'm going to finish up here and then go home to my apartment." Maria gathered her books with obvious reluctance. "Miss Mitchell, why are they so angry? We're just trying to learn." Sarah knelt down to be at the girl's eye level. "Sometimes, Maria, when people have been told for a long time that certain things are impossible, they get angry when someone shows them those things might actually be possible. They're not really angry at you. They're angry at having to question what they've always believed. Will you still be our teacher on Monday?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. The hope and fear in Maria's voice made it clear that the girl understood more about the situation than any 13-year-old should have to. "I'll be here Monday morning when that bell rings," Sarah promised. "You can count on it." After Maria left, Sarah remained in the classroom longer than usual, double-checking lesson plans for the following week and organizing materials. Part of her was procrastinating, reluctant to return to her apartment where she would be alone with her thoughts and fears. But as the sun began to set, painting the classroom walls in shades of orange and gold, she finally gathered her things and locked the school building. The walk to May's diner felt different tonight. The streets were too quiet, with an absence of the usual evening activity. No children playing in yards, no neighbors chatting over fence lines, no sounds of family dinners being prepared. Even the dogs seemed to be hiding. May was waiting in the diner when Sarah arrived, her face creased with worry. "Sarah, honey, we need to talk." May gestured toward a booth in the back corner, away from the windows. "I've been hearing things all day, and I'm scared for you." They sat across from each other, and May's hands trembled slightly as she poured coffee from the pot she'd brought to the table. "What kind of things?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "Frank Weber and his friends have been drinking at Murphy's back room since noon. They've been joined by some men from other towns, rough types who hire themselves out for dirty work." May's voice dropped to a whisper. "Dorothy Murphy is beside herself. She tried to refuse to serve them, but Frank threatened to make trouble for her business." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "What are they planning?" "I don't know exactly, but it's nothing good. Jim Patterson came by around 4 o'clock. He looked sick with worry. He said the men were talking about teaching you a lesson and making sure you understand how things work around here." "Did he say anything specific?" "He said to tell you that you should leave town tonight. Take the bus out first thing in the morning and don't come back." May reached across the table and grasped Sarah's hands. "Honey, maybe you should listen to him." Sarah looked into May's frightened eyes and saw genuine affection and concern. This woman had become like a mother to her in the brief time she'd been in Copper Creek, and the thought of disappointing her was painful. "May, I can't run away. Those children are counting on me. If I leave now, what message does that send to Maria and the others? That they're not worth fighting for. But if you stay, you might not be able to help anyone. Dead martyrs don't teach school." The blunt words hung in the air between them. Sarah had been trying not to think about the possibility of serious physical harm, but May's fear was forcing her to confront the reality of her situation. "What would you do, May, if you were in my position?" May was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup. 20 years ago, I might have done exactly what you're doing, but I'm older now, and I've seen what fear can make people do. These men aren't just going to write angry letters or make speeches. They're planning something that will hurt you." As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of vehicles could be heard approaching from the direction of Murphy's store. Sarah and May both turned toward the front windows, though the angle made it impossible to see the street clearly. "Go upstairs," May whispered urgently. "Lock your door and don't come out no matter what you hear." Sarah stood up, but instead of heading toward the stairs that led to her apartment, she moved toward the front window. Through the glass, she could see a convoy of pickup trucks moving slowly down Main Street. Even in the gathering darkness, she could make out the silhouettes of multiple men in each vehicle. "They're not stopping here," she said with some relief. "Yet," May replied grimly. "But the night is young." Sarah reluctantly went upstairs to her apartment, but she couldn't bring herself to follow May's advice about staying locked inside. Instead, she positioned herself by the window that overlooked Main Street, watching the town below for signs of trouble. Around 10 o'clock, she saw the trucks return, moving even more slowly this time. They parked in front of the general store, and men began climbing out. In the darkness, it was impossible to count them accurately, but there appeared to be at least 15 or 20 figures gathering in the street. She could hear voices now, though not clearly enough to make out words. The tone was aggressive and excited, like men working themselves up to action. Someone had brought a lantern, and in its flickering light she could see gestures and pointing in various directions. Then, to her horror, the group began moving toward the church at the end of Main Street, the Methodist church where she'd planned to attend services, where she'd hoped to become part of the community. They were carrying rope. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she understood what was happening. The church, with its prominent location and symbolic importance, would be the perfect place for a public humiliation. They weren't just planning to hurt her. They were planning to make an example of her that the entire town would see. She grabbed her coat and headed for the door, then stopped. What could she do against 20 men? If she went to the sheriff's office, would anyone even be there? And even if there was, would they help her or join the mob? The sound of vehicles starting up again drew her back to the window. The trucks were moving toward the church, their headlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights. This was really happening. Sarah made a decision that surprised even her. Instead of hiding or running, she walked downstairs and out the back door of the diner. If they were going to humiliate her publicly, she wouldn't make it easy for them. She would face whatever they had planned with dignity and courage. But as she made her way through the dark alleys toward the church, moving carefully to avoid being seen, she had no idea that someone else was also moving through the shadows of Copper Creek. Someone who had been watching and waiting, someone who understood the danger better than she did. Thomas Yazzie had not returned to the reservation after warning his family to stay away from town. Instead, he had been keeping watch from the hills overlooking Copper Creek, seeing the gathering storm and knowing that Sarah Mitchell was about to face the same fate that had driven away the previous teacher. Only this time, the men were angrier and more determined to send a message that would be remembered. As Sarah crept through the darkness toward whatever awaited her at the church, Thomas was already moving to intercept her, his years of tracking and hunting in the desert giving him advantages the angry townsmen couldn't imagine. The night was about to become much more dangerous than anyone anticipated.